Well, I want to say welcome to everybody today. It looks like we have about 18 people here, and that's how many people we had signed up. So hopefully most who were planning to come have been able to arrive. Thank you for coming today. I think this is a really important session for all of us, and I'm looking forward to it. I will very briefly introduce Stephen Kniffley. I know many of you hopefully already know him. And he is a professor in the School of Professional Psychology, but also our new, and I always call you our Chief Diversity Officer. I know your title is officially longer than that, but I think that's what you've shared with me, Stephen, and so that's what I what I tend to use. But I'm going to let him also introduce himself or whatever he wants to say as he gets started. But thank you, Stephen, today, and we are recording this, so it will be available after our meeting. If you want to recommend to other faculty or people in your office to take an opportunity to watch it later. All right, so thanks, Stephen, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Good morning, or yes, good morning to everybody because it's still morning, even though the days all run together now. It's so good to see you all here in the space. I'm Stephen. I'm grateful to share with you a little bit about this idea of microaggressions and how we can support our students and ourselves within the classroom setting. So what I'm hoping to do today is we will do a little bit of a didactic. I'll share a video with you as an example of what microaggressions look like. We'll also engage in experiential activity because I tend to be very hands-on as an instructor and then also as a presenter. We'll have some conversation around how you experience the activity. And then we'll end with talking about, well, what can we do? And so I'll give you some practical guidelines and some examples about how to manage microaggressions in the classroom, as well as how to create a more inclusive classroom setting. And so that'll take us right up into our hour, and I will bid you adieu and hope that you have a great rest of your day. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Awesome, already a success. Screen is shared. So just a little bit about myself. I never start any presentation without just kind of paying honor and homage to those folks that have paved the way for me to be here. So if you look to your right there, there's a picture of myself because I've been this cute since the beginning with my grandpa, my pawpaw. I actually have a foster son now who we're looking to adopt here real soon, who is around the same age as I am in that picture. And so I'm just really grateful because hopefully I'm pouring into him in the same way that other folks have poured into me as well. As was noted before, I'm the Chief Diversity Officer now for Spalding, and it's been an honor and a privilege to be in that role to support our justice, equity, and inclusion efforts here in Spalding, as well as in the greater community. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Professional Psychology, and I'm also the coordinator for the Collective Care Center, which is one of very few racial trauma clinics in the entire U.S. Just a little bit about my educational background. I'm a proud graduate of Spalding, where I got my first master's degree and then my doctorate in clinical psychology. I also have a master's in public administration from Wright State. I'm board certified in clinical psychology and I'm licensed here in Kentucky as well as in Ohio. My areas of interest include all things Black male related, specifically around Black male psychology, multicultural psychology, and then also racial trauma treatment. So, I have these student loans, so I'm just going to hustle a couple of books to pay off those loans. So I have two books. I've written four books total. Two books that you might have interest in are on Black male mental health and how do we support Black males that have struggled with those issues. And then also exploring the difficulties and challenges Black males might face within the criminal justice system. Was recently selected as one of our top 40 under 40 for the city of Louisville, and was also able to conduct a TED Talk on how do we have conversations with folks that are different from ourselves, and we'll hopefully share some of that insight with you today. I host a blog called The Afrocentric Psychologist, where we talk about all things Black folks related. specifically in the areas of criminal justice and education, healthcare, etc. Additionally, I was awarded the Healthcare Advocacy Award for the work that I do around racial trauma in terms of education, service provision, and then also training. I was recently selected as one of 2021's healthcare heroes for the city of Louisville as well. So I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to have the platform of the Collective Care Center rise up to be able to continue to provide meaningful service to Black and Brown individuals. So, with the time that we have today, I'm hoping to cover three main objectives. I'm hoping to at least center our understanding around the same type of definitions when it comes to microaggressions and this idea of intersectionality, which will help us to reduce the impact of microaggressions. We'll explore what it looks like to teach from an intersectional lens. And then I'll end our conversation by discussing interventions for the creation of an inclusive classroom environment for all of our students. So first, I just want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page when it comes to this idea of microaggressions. Microaggressions, according to Sue and colleagues, are those vague and unclear racial insults towards people of color. And this can also mean other marginalized groups as well. There are three main types of microaggressions. There are micro insults, micro assaults, and then also micro invalidations. So micro insults are communications that are used to convey rudeness and insensitivity towards someone about their racial background. Micro assaults are the use of verbal and nonverbal racial attacks. For example, using the word thug. So in today's time is not appropriate, if you will, to utilize certain racial slurs. However, folks can utilize words such as thug, which imply the same context, content, and meaning without the social consequences that typically go with the use of racial slur in our day and time. The last one here is micro invalidations. So the young folks also refer to this as gaslighting. And these are essentially communications that are used to exclude or deny the lived experience of persons of color. And so the difficulty with those type of messages is that they deny the systems that are in place that are designed to make things harder for people of color simply because of the color of their skin and the socio-historical context connected to those pieces. So here are a couple of examples of what those microaggressions can look like. So for example, a micro insult or saying things like you're a credit to your race, or why are your people so loud? A micro invalidation is saying things like I don't see color. If you don't like it here, go back to your country. We're all a melting pot. We're all Americans, and everyone can succeed if they just work hard enough. As we mentioned before, the young folks are referring to micro invalidations as gaslighting. And the difficulty of micro invalidations is that although they appear well-meaning on the surface because they imply that I'm a good individual that is attempting to value you as another individual, what they miss out on is this idea that there are systems in play that are purposefully designed to create limitations on voice and choice for marginalized individuals. And so by saying things like, I don't see color, you're essentially denying and diminishing the impact that those systems might have on the lived experience of those folks around us. And so the difficulty with microaggressions is that for many marginalized folks, it's not the first time that they hear a microaggression that causes difficulty and challenge. They're able to utilize their adaptive skill sets. They're able to educate the offender about what they said and did was wrong. They're able to offer a counter narrative that is different and opposite from what the stereotype was placed upon them, or they're able to seek out sources of support that will help them to feel affirmed in their lived experience. However, as the science is indicating, at least for Black Americans here, 96% of Black Americans report a daily experience of racism and discrimination, which means that from the time that they are born until ultimately the time that they die, they will encounter some form of microaggression on a daily basis. And so, because of that, it's not the first time that you experience microaggression that poses a challenge. It's the 10th time, it's the 100th time, it's the 10,000th time, et cetera, that causes stress and strain for Black and Brown individuals. The science has indicated that stress and strain is also known as race-related stress. And so as you think about those folks that are students that might be walking into our classroom and are sitting in the difficult times that we are in. So for example, this is the week in which we continue to mourn the death of Breonna Taylor, that many folks are walking into these spaces, experiencing these microaggressions and experiencing this race-related stress that could potentially impact their schooling, their ability to engage and participate. And so these are things that we have to be mindful of, not just because of the outside environment that could be contributing to microaggressions, but also our environment in terms of our curriculum, our methods of instruction, and then just how we interact with our students in terms of relationship building could also be sources of microaggressions as well. So I just want to play a short clip here of a video that will help us to kind of better see what these microaggressions can look like and how these can impact folks.
Good morning. How are you? Cool. So, can we talk about how you got here?
Yeah, you think I got a funny looking face?
Hey kids, I'm telling you, go right here.
Man, we ain't doing nothing.
Go right here before I'm called cops.
So, you didn't do anything?
Nope.
Then what's all this?
Depends on who's reading it, I guess.
Well, looks broken. Skateboarding, huh?
Yes.
Is this the first time you've hurt yourself?
No, I get hurt all the time.
At home?
At home? He hurt himself skateboarding at the park.
Okay, ma'am. I'm going to have a counselor come in and speak with you.
A counselor? For what? He's okay.
Well, I done told you them tricks was gonna put you in the hospital.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, too. A nurse will be in a few minutes to help you check out.
What's up?
That doctor thought I did this to him.
How you doing?
Hi.
It ain't fair. Fair has nothing to do with this. This is about you taking responsibility for your actions. Look, I know so many young men just like you that didn't do anything. And yet, most of them are in prison.
You don't know me. I ain't going to no prison.
If you don't want to end up in prison, you're going to have to get some new priorities and probably some new friends, too. Look, you're not getting any younger. You need to get an education so you can get a good job.
Like you just like everybody else. You think you see, but you don't see. You see what you want to see.
I see what's in this folder. It shows me what you've been doing.
I ain't doing nothing.
I am not doing anything. Stop!
I ain't doing nothing.
I'm not doing anything. And yes, you were. Get to the timeout chair. Now, please. I'm sorry. I am so sorry.
So if we think about that particular video there, you know, the difficulty in that is that oftentimes the youth pictured in there was reduced to a single story, where folks would have a general assumption about who he was, his actions, his behaviors, etc. And that's oftentimes where microaggressions lie, right? Is when we engage in a single story narrative connected to someone. So, for example, when he says, you just see what you want to see, right? And so, what are we primed to see? What are we reinforced to see when it comes to persons of color, when it comes to other marginalized groups? Oftentimes, it's seeing them as dangerous, dumb, and deviant individuals. And if you see throughout that young man's life, oftentimes that's how he was being portrayed as well. You know, whether it was his teacher, whether it was the store owner, whether it was the doctor at the hospital, each one of those saw him based on a very narrow single story. And so if you think about how we can engage in microaggressions ourselves, it's not being able to think outside of just a single story narrative connected to the young folks that we're working with in the classroom setting. And so I want to take a few minutes here to help us to really take the perspective of someone who has experienced these form of microaggressions. So I'm going to put a link in the chat. And so I don't know if anybody's ever played those Choose Your Own Adventure books. I used to read those a lot when I was a kid. And the cool thing about those books is that, you know, you would have the option to choose at the end of a chapter about what it is that you wanted to do, right? And the cool thing about those books is you know, you always had a choice. You could always go in one direction or another. I'll let you know that I cheated at those books, right? Because, you know, like it would take me to the sand pits or a whole bunch of snakes or something along those lines. And I would say, no, no, gotta go a different direction. And so then I would just backtrack and then go to another part of the book. And so what I'm hoping we'll do is we'll do something similar in this space. My goal has always been for us to try to do this in a group setting. I don't know if Donna, if you know how to do that. If not, we could just do it individually. I usually give folks about 10 minutes to at least start to get through the activity itself.
Yeah, do you want to break out into some smaller groups? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. There are 24 people here, so do you have a certain size in mind that you would like, or?
So somewhere between 3 and 4 folks would be great.
Okay. And you said about 10 minutes?
About 10 minutes. And it's, I really encourage you all of us to kind of walk through this activity together.
So you should be seeing a request to join a room here in just a second, and then you'll get a countdown when we're ready to come back.
Well, what were you sitting with as you engaged in the activity?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. What are you sitting with as you engaged in the activity? So, you know, this was an opportunity for us to take the perspective of those folks that have experienced microaggressions. Like, what are you sitting with?
I was shocked. Like, just floored if, you know, people would say stuff like that. You know.
So
I actually wasn't shocked at all. It's almost like it's not surprising. Some people feel that it's okay for them them to say things like that that are inappropriate to people and still feel okay with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Felt a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. This kind of thing makes me nauseous. It's like, and then I pray that I've not said something quite as egregious as what was in the vignette, but I'm sure I must have said something. I'm not naive.
So I hear a lot of shock. I hear a lot of, I hear folks saying that they're not surprised with what they experience. Anxiety also connected to what you witnessed as well from our folks. What other emotions might you be sitting with, or other thoughts too?
I was struck by the impact of exhaustion. I think there were two different cases. So we had the female case study, and you know, you could look at them and go, well, there's the correct answer, or there's the healthy answer, or whatever label you want to put on it. And then you factor in the exhaustion of just having to do that again. That response doesn't look so healthy anymore.
Yeah, for sure. And so one of the things that I oftentimes see from folks is, well, how do I respond as myself, or do I respond as how the person in the scenario might respond? And thinking about how there are certain ways that I think about the world, especially as a male, that perhaps the female person wouldn't have even thought to respond to, and vice versa. And so to think about how engaging in this activity can be exhausting, like you're saying, because sometimes you're having to make choices that you otherwise might not have to make if you were a different person in that person's shoes. Yeah, very good thoughts all around. And, you know, this is a really meaningful conversation for us to think about how we can keep that exhaustion, that anxiety, that kind of hopelessness and helplessness that you might have felt during this activity in mind, as we also think about our students too. Because, you know, we did this for 10 minutes. For many of our students, this has been their experience from the time that they're born until the time that they step into your classroom. And so just being mindful that this might be the burden and the weight that some of our students might be carrying with them. So I made this out a little bit. And so now I'm going to what can we do about it as meaningful instructors in the classroom settings. And so I'm going to talk about this ideal of intersectionality. And I'm also going to talk about this concept of being good allies and advocates through the use of microinterventions for microaggressions. So one of the things that we had talked about before was that microaggressions rest and grow and lie in spaces where we take a single story narrative, right? So when we only see a person as one part of who they are, that makes it easier for us to see them as something that we can microaggress against. And so intersectionality helps us to do three things to help us to live outside of that single story experience. The first one here is that intersectionality helps us to frame the circumstances of marginalized groups and fight for their visibility and inclusion as whole people, and not just part of who they are. Intersectionality also helps us to emphasize this ideal that we can't see any individual as a single or discrete person, because by doing that, we only see a part of their narrative. And by doing it in that perspective, that limits our ability to effectively work for and create change for marginalized folks. And the last piece here is that intersectionality helps us to be aware of those larger structures that maintain systems of power and oppression that lead to the single story narrative in the first place. And so there are three core tenets connected to intersectionality. The first one here is that it allows us to unveil power. So for many of us, we create a single story narrative because it's essentially the water that we swim in. Right? Power is the water that we swim in. As a male, the world is designed in a way to make things easier for me, to make sure I have representation always, and make sure I always have access to voice and choice. And that's the water that I swim in. And so intersectionality helps me to be aware that I can't just swim in the water without any sort of ideal, that I have to be aware of what it is that I'm navigating through. Intersectionality also helps us to recognize that power is connected to systems of inequality that are designed to maintain spaces of voice and choice for privileged folks here and in other places as well. And the last piece here is that intersectionality, by recognizing that power is the water that we swim in, and that power is maintained by structures of inequality, that we have to do something about it, where we have to be aware, similar to the stories that we navigated through in the activity, that there has to be somebody supporting those folks in order to make sure that we're engaging in good promotions of social justice. And so when we think about how to teach from an intersectional lens, it really encourages us to do four things. So in our curriculum, in our methods of instruction, et cetera, we should be centering the experiences of marginalized individuals. So I think about my own field of psychology and about how almost all of our textbooks are rooted and centered in the privileged space, where we talk a lot about old white men, about how we have to be more intentional based on that to make sure that we're centering the experience of marginalized individuals, to talk about liberation psychology, to talk about Black psychology, et cetera. And so be thinking in your own field, how can we lift up and amplify the voices of those folks who otherwise are not heard, but have contributed meaningfully to the field of your profession? Additionally here, we have to acknowledge the multifaceted interactions of cultural identities. So although I identify as a Black male, because I also identify as someone in the middle class status, someone that's highly educated, someone that's able-bodied, heterosexual, et cetera, how I experience that Black identity perhaps will be different from someone who identifies as lower SES, has limited education, or identifies as a gay individual, and also someone with a disability. And so like how we engage with those identities will be different based on the other identities that we interact with. Additionally, we have to be aware of the systems of power and oppression that exist, not only in our spaces, but also in the ways in which we engage in our instruction as well. How are we reinforcing certain privileged ways of thinking about the world by centering certain voices and then not amplifying the voices of our marginalized folks. And then the last piece here is that all of our should be rooted in demonstrating a commitment to eradicating systems of inequality as an ally and advocate. So making sure that we are amplifying the voices of marginalized folks, that we're talking about how to support folks that have experienced marginalization, and that we're actively engaging in efforts to be good allies and advocates as a model for our students in the classroom. And so I just kind of want to end here. Well, I got a couple more minutes. So to talk about this idea of microinterventions for microaggressions. And so we've talked about how there's a philosophy that we can take within the school, within the classroom setting, right? So engaging in an intersectional perspective. Because what that will allow us to do is be able to see our students as whole students and not just as a single story based on a identity variable that they hold. Because typically when we hold a single story perspective and we're engaged with marginalized folks, oftentimes that perspective is rooted in what we think their most marginalized identity is. And so if someone sees me, they'll say, this person is a Black individual, and based on that, that's the identity that I need to focus on. And that could be an identity that's important to me, or it could be an identity that is not. If you see someone in a wheelchair that it also identifies as a member of the LGBT community, you could assume that their disability status is most important to them, but really their sexual orientation is. And so by taking a whole person perspective, by taking a more intersectional perspective, it allows us to center what is most important to that individual, rather than thinking about what we feel should be most important to that individual. So that's the posture that we should be taking in the classroom setting. However, sometimes we will see students interact and engage in microaggressive behaviors, or we will see our colleagues interact with our students and engage in microaggressive behaviors. And so we need to also have action, right? So there's the posture and philosophy in regards to intersectionality and teaching from an intersectional lens, but we also have to have an action orientation as well to support those folks that have experienced microaggressions. Because in both of those scenarios that we went through, what those folks needed was an ally. They needed someone that was willing to stand up and say, you know, why did you ask where that person was from? Or why are you asking questions about the texture of that individual's hair? Or why are you asking that person if they're gonna buy anything when I've been standing over here all this time? You know, why are you doing those things? And so I just want to offer up some more practical ways for us to think about how we can intervene when we see microaggressions in the classroom setting. And so there are 4 areas that student colleagues have talked about. They're making the invisible visible, they're disarming the microaggression, they're educating the offender, and then also seeking out external support. And so I'll just run through these quickly, and if you want access to these examples later, I'll be happy to share them with you. But when it comes to making the invisible visible, the difficulty with microaggressions is the ambiguity that surrounds them. So if someone comes up to me and says, wow, you're really articulate, are they saying that because I've read a whole bunch of books and because I have a doctorate and because I'm a professor and all those type of things? Or is there a for in there? You know, wow, you're really articulate for a Black individual, because they have this expectation that otherwise would not have a command of the English language in the way that I do. And so what making the visible visible does is it helps us to bring to light the subtext that oftentimes underlines the microaggressions that we encounter. And so there are 4 different ways in which we can intervene there. We can undermine the meta-communication. We can make the meta-communication more explicit. We can also ask for clarification, and then we can also challenge the stereotype. And so, like, for an example, making meta-communication more explicit, that allows the individual to let the perpetrator of the microaggression know directly what they said and how that behavior is offensive in nature. Additionally, asking for clarification can contribute to the individual that caused the microaggression to be able to double back and think through, well, why did I say that? Because it causes a point for reflection, and then also allow the individual to step back from what it is that they said. Excuse me. The next one here is disarming the microaggression. And so this is a more direct strategy. So instead of facilitating the space where the person is guided towards awareness about why what they said and did was microaggressive in nature, this is more of a, I need to stop this right now by naming it before it moves any further. And so there are 4 different steps that you can utilize here. You can express disagreement. You can state your values and set your limits. You can describe what you're experiencing out loud. You can also utilize your nonverbal communication. So for example, stating values and setting limits can look like if someone tells an off-putting joke, to state, I don't want to hear that joke again in my presence, which is setting your limits. And then I would appreciate if you never said that again, which is also stating your values in the situation as well. And so disarming the microaggressions is more of an active way. It helps us to stop the microaggression while it's occurring, whereas making the invisible visible helps us to facilitate a space of awareness for how that person can think through, well, why did I say what I said? Why did I do what I did? Educating the offender, sometimes folks just don't know what they don't know because of the spaces in which they've lived, the environments that they've grown up in, etc. And so sometimes we have to work to educate folks about why their microaggressive behavior was challenging. We can do this by pointing out commonalities. We can highlight the difference between impact and intent. We can point out how the perpetrators benefit from not engaging in microaggressive behavior. Then we can also find spaces where we can promote greater empathy. So for example, utilizing the activity is a space where we can promote more empathy because folks are now saying, potentially have been saying, like, wow, that was really hard. I can't imagine what it must be like to have to go and navigate through life, experiencing those type of microaggressions on a daily basis. And so that's an example of how we can educate the offender about the challenges that their microaggressive behaviors have caused for folks. The last one here is seeking out external support. So you've attempted to make the invisible visible, you've disarmed the microaggression as best as you can. You've also tried to educate the offender and it's just not working. The difficulty in all of these spaces is that by continuing to be and educate folks around microaggressions, that you actually might start thinking that what those folks are saying about marginalized folks, what they're saying about you might be true, because you're finding that none of the interventions that you're using are working. And so what seeking external support does is it helps the individual to find spaces where they can be affirmed and valued in regards to their lived experience, outside of just the microaggressions that they're encountering. And so what seeking external support can look like is finding support in a spiritual, religious, or community space, attending support groups, such as the ones that we have at the Collective Care Center, but also just fostering a sense of community belonging with folks that will lift you up, will affirm you, and will validate your lived experience as a marginalized person. And so if we think about how we can both utilize that intersectional lens in regards to our teaching practices, we can also engage in a more action-oriented approach when we see microaggressions occur in the classroom setting by making the invisible visible, by disarming the microaggression, by educating the offender, and then also supporting our students in seeking those areas of external support. And so I just want to end with just a couple of thoughts about how we can create an inclusive classroom. And then with the time that we'll have left, I will open it up to any sort of dialogue that you all would like to have. So these are some things to think about when it comes to creating an inclusive classroom. It's important to establish classroom ground rules to create a brave space for folks to be their most authentic selves as well as to hold one another, as well as you as the instructor accountable for any sort of microaggressive behavior. And I'll say a brave space because oftentimes we use a safe space language. And the difficulty with safe space language is that I, as the instructor, cannot always create a safe space for everyone. But what I can do is I can create a space where folks feel confident and comfortable naming their experience and reaching out for support if they need it. We can also provide a space for students to share their salient identities. Most of the time, sometimes when we're engaging in our instruction, because we just assume that a student is operating in a certain space, that we have to ask. We have to facilitate opportunities for the student to tell us what's most important to them in terms of their salient identities rather than assuming. Additionally, we can empower students during the curriculum design process. So yes, we are the keepers of the content knowledge, but the students know best what their process needs to look like in terms of learning, and then also what they need to be exposed to in regards to contextual information as well. Another piece here is making sure that students are aware of the evaluative tools that will be used to evaluate their faculty, how they'll be evaluated as well, because it will give them more opportunity to think about, well, am I getting what I should be getting out of this class? And if I'm not, I can offer up feedback to the faculty member before the end. I can offer up feedback and support throughout. That way that none of us are waiting till after the class is over before a student is able to say, hey, I'm not getting what I need in this space. Microaggressions lie in ambiguous spaces, and those spaces more ambiguous than an assignment without any rubric attached to it that a student knows what they're going to be evaluated on. And so making sure to provide clear rubrics for your assignments. Additionally, review your curriculum for inclusion. When you look at your textbooks, when you look at your assignments, are they centering one group over another? Especially groups that have privilege and have oftentimes had their representation in spaces already. Are you providing mechanisms to receive student feedback throughout the class process? So for example, one of the things I do in my classes is we have midterm check-ins where I take a part of the class and I just sit down with each student and I ask the student, how are things going? How are you experiencing this class? What can I do differently in order to make sure that you receive what you need out of this class? Because what I found early on as an instructor was that oftentimes I would get helpful feedback at the end of the class that I could have used throughout the class if I would have known about it prior. And so always make sure to create a space where students can provide feedback ongoing, as well as a formal space somewhere in the middle of the class process. And the last piece here, similar to what I'm hoping you're experiencing in this space, is a utilization of a multimodal classroom instruction practices. So for example, even in the hour that we've just had together, we've had small groups, we've had large groups, we've watched video, we've had experiential activities, we've did didactics. We've had at least 5 different ways for folks to engage the information rather than just our standard kind of PowerPoint format. So there's my contact information. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to send these slides to you as well. The website that I mentioned is drstevennifleyjr.com. And also I'm on Instagram if you want to follow me there. Keep up with some of the things that I'm doing. I welcome your participation in that space as well. So I think we have like 2 minutes left. I almost got it right on the number. But if there are any questions I can answer for you, I'd be happy to support you.
Dr. Kniffley, I had a question about that midterm check-in. Are you doing that one-on-one or are you doing that with the class as a whole?
I'm doing a one-on-one. I think about how there are some students that would not offer feedback in a large group setting. And I found that almost all students will offer some form of feedback in a more smaller, in a one-on-one type of experience. And so I let them know it's not attached to their grade. I let them see that I'm responsive to their feedback because they'll see an immediate change if it's deemed appropriate from the time that they tell me feedback until the time that I'll do something different. And so those are usually things that people are concerned about. Will this impact my grade? Or will you actually do something about it? And I'll try to demonstrate that that yes, it matters, and yes, I will do something differently. And so I meet with each student. It's usually about 10 minutes. I usually have like about a 10-minute meeting with each student to just ask how are things going, how can I support you, and I'll support them in that way.
Thank you.
Welcome. And I found it to be really effective. I've did that every year since my second year teaching. Because after that first year, I was like, wow, these people, I really wish I would have known that before, and I didn't. And so I wanted to do something different for me.
Dr. Kniffley, do you do these, as I'm hearing something about the feedback, that was something that was suggested to me in terms of diffusing student, they call it student anger or student frustrations about the class. So halfway through to kind of get that feedback from the students. Have you seen that that helps? Because it does impact the faculty evaluations at the end.
Yeah, for sure. And if it's student anger related issues, I'm probably not going to wait till the midterm time. I'm going to invite a conversation earlier on in the process. And if it's an A student, of course, it's not going to be that 10-minute time. You know, we're going to set up a time, have a 30 to 45-minute conversation about it that will be focused on acknowledging and validating their emotions, but also thinking through what problem solving could look like. Because, you know, sometimes students are just angry. And that's okay. I'm willing to hear you out about it and support you in that. But then sometimes students are angry for a reason, and I want to make sure we're able to problem solve whatever that might look like for them. Any other questions I can answer for folks? I also just want to be mindful. I know folks got to eat, and I don't know about you all, but I also like to eat too. If there are any questions that folks have, I'd be happy to answer them for
you. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to say a big thank you to you, Stephen. This was great. So thank you.
Thank you.
Recording will be
so much.
Thank you.
So I'll send out notice probably tomorrow that the recording is available.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, thank you. And then if anybody wants the PowerPoint slides, I'd be happy to email them to you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your